Welcome to our 15th episode of Child Sexual Abuse Prevention by Zina podcast. I'm your host, Zina Poncel. Today's podcast is a series of 3 podcasts, and the main focus will be on human trafficking. We will focus on the definition of human trafficking and exactly what it entails today. Next week, we're going to go over commercial sexual exploitation of children, and that'll be Thursday, July the 18th. And it's also known as CSEC, CSEC, the acronym for, again, commercial sexual exploitation of children. And the third segment will drop on July the 25th, and we're going to go over myths and facts of CSEC. I will also be providing you all with links to different websites that have a whole lot more information on this subject than what I'm providing. Remember, most of the time, I'm just skimming off the top of whatever I'm talking about. So you can go to these websites. They should have some printable, many will have printable PDF sheets and a ton more information. So I would highly encourage you to go to those. I might not post those or mention those until the 3rd episode, but who knows? I may drop them in the middle. You never know. If you're super busy and want to learn more about this information and don't really have time to go navigate through the websites, you can shoot me an email at csapreventionbyzina@gmail.com. Say, please send me those human trafficking PDF forms, and I'll be happy to provide them to you completely free. Just connect with me, and I'll send them to you. Or any of the past episodes' information, I'll be happy to send them to you. So I'm here to provide you the information and to help, and as a part of it, I'll be glad to. So now let's learn about human trafficking. At first, I guess we need to define what human trafficking is. So human trafficking is a very serious crime and a huge violation of human rights. It involves the recruitment, the transportation, the transfer, the harboring, or receipt of people through force, fraud, or coercion with the goal of exploiting them. And exploitation can take many forms. Now, I know this podcast is specific to child sexual abuse and related topics. So what I'm going to talk to you about moving forward, the subjects I'm fixing to give you on human trafficking actually include people of all ages. But then after that, I'm going to break it down into the child human trafficking component of it. Okay, so bear with me, hang in there, and we will cruise on through. So here are the forms that exploitation can take. There's forced labor. Victims are made to work under the threat of violence or some other penalty. This can occur in various industries such as agriculture, construction, manufacturing, and domestic work. Sexual exploitation, and many of you have heard about this, probably more so than anything else. A lot of people, when they hear human trafficking, they automatically think that it's always specific to sexual exploitation or some other sexual topic. But human trafficking actually includes several different things that includes sexual exploitation. So under sexual exploitation, victims are coerced into performing sexual acts against their will. This is often seen in the context of prostitution, pornography, and sex tourism. Domestic servitude. Victims are forced to work in private homes, performing domestic tasks under abusive conditions. And think about that, too, as far as how it could relate to domestic violence. I might do something on that later. Okay, organ trafficking. Y'all have heard of this. Victims are exploited for the removal of their organs, which are then sold illegally. Child exploitation. Children are trafficked for various forms of exploitation, including labor, sexual exploitation, and use as soldiers in conflict zones. Many people were unaware of that, but that's also a part of it. Human trafficking can happen within a country or across international borders. Traffickers often use deceptive tactics. They trick people or they tell them lies, basically, such as false promises of employment, education, or a better life to lure their victims. They may also use threats, violence, and manipulation to maintain control over their victims. Efforts to combat human trafficking include international agreements, national laws, law enforcement activities, victim support services, and public awareness campaigns. The goal is to prevent trafficking, prosecute traffickers, and protect and assist victims. And I can say today, 2024, human trafficking information has definitely surfaced as far as in the prevention educational field, which I'm proud to say. So more people are aware of it. So, knowledge is power. So the more you know, hopefully the better we can work together, actually as a world, not just in the United States or not just in this certain specific countries, but together as a whole on a global aspect of it, and better protect people from this crime of human trafficking. The ones I'm fixing to go over now are specific to children. So these are child human trafficking components, and they are very, very similar, if not the same, to those previous ones that I just read you that basically include people of all ages. But right now I'm moving into our kids. So child human trafficking is a severe form of human trafficking where children are exploited for various purposes, often through force, fraud, or coercion, just like I read in the previous one. The primary forms of child trafficking include sexual exploitation, and that's the main one that people hear about, and it is very horrific. Children are forced into prostitution, pornography, and other forms of commercial sexual exploitation. This can happen anywhere in the world. It can happen in people's private homes. It can happen through online platforms. It can happen anywhere. Forced labor is another form. Children are made to work in harsh and dangerous conditions in industries such as agriculture, mining, manufacturing, and domestic work. They may also be used as beggars or street vendors. Child soldiers. In conflict zones, children are forcibly recruited and coerced into serving as soldiers, spies, messengers, or used for other military purposes. Illegal adoption. Children are trafficked for illegal adoptions, where they are taken from their families and sold to adoptive parents without proper legal procedures. Forced marriage. Children, particularly girls, are trafficked for the purpose of forced marriage, often involving significant age differences and abusive conditions. Organ trafficking. Children are trafficked for the illegal trade of their organs, which are then sold on the black market. And people, this is global. This is everything I just mentioned. It's not just in one part of the world. It's all over the place. And I'm sure it's more prominent in some places than others, but just know it can be anywhere. There are several factors that have been found to contribute to the vulnerability of children to trafficking, and those include poverty, families in desperate financial situations. They can be tricked or coerced into giving up their children. Lack of education. Limited access to education can increase vulnerability, as children and their families may not be aware of the dangers of trafficking. Demand for cheap labor and exploitation. Industries that rely on cheap labor or sexual exploitation create a demand that traffickers seek to fulfill. Did y'all catch what I just read there? Where it said industries that rely on cheap labor or sexual exploitation create a demand for traffickers to seek to fulfill? Now think about that. Yes, sexual exploitation is an industry. It is a business for these traffickers. They make money. They have their own accountant. They have their own employees in targeting these kids and obtaining them and trafficking them. Weak legal systems. Inadequate legal protections and enforcement can allow traffickers to operate with impunity or exemption from punishment. Now let's look at efforts to combat child trafficking. It involves a combination of several things, which are prevention, protection, and prosecution strategies. So the prevention piece, which I would like to think is what I'm doing now, and I know several people that are out there constantly trying to stop human trafficking in regard to the sexual exploitation component of it, based on my background and I know their background. So raising awareness, improving economic opportunities, and providing education is, to me, a huge part in reducing the risk of trafficking. Now, the protection piece, providing support services, maybe for those that have been trafficked, such as shelters, medical care, psychological support, and legal assistance to victims, prosecution, strengthening the legal framework, enhancing law enforcement capabilities, and ensuring traffickers are held accountable through the legal system. International organizations, governments, non-governmental organizations, which are called NGOs, and communities all play crucial roles in addressing the complex issue of child trafficking. I'm fixing to bring all of this together and talk about who is vulnerable. Human trafficking can happen to anyone of any age and any gender, but some people are more vulnerable than others. Significant risk factors include recent relocation, substance use, mental health concerns, involvement with the child welfare system, or being a runaway or a homeless youth. Often, traffickers identify and leverage their victims' vulnerabilities in order to create dependency. They want their victims to be dependent on them. I'm just going to mention one website today. It has some good information in it. It's called the Child Welfare Information Gateway, and I will have the link to that website in the description of this podcast. I encourage you to go on there and navigate around. This site offers information on preventing and addressing child trafficking and exploitation, including CSEC, which I mentioned earlier, commercial sexual exploitation of children, which is a part of human trafficking. It's a huge part of human trafficking. Anyway, there's resources for professionals and caregivers at this website. Again, it's Child Welfare Information Gateway. Human trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation of children are closely related but distinct concepts. It's like CSEC is a subgroup of human trafficking, each with specific characteristics and definitions, which I will cover next week on the podcast next Thursday, which is part 2 of the series of 3 on human trafficking. So tune in, join me, and I'll go over CSEC with you guys next week, and I'll have some additional websites to go to. If you need some information before then, don't forget, you can shoot me an email, CSA Prevention by Zina, that's Zina, @gmail.com. If you have any questions, or again, if you want additional information. Remember, whether you learn about child sexual abuse from me or from someone else, please learn about it from somewhere. There are some very informative podcasts, blogs, and probably local education on the subject offered right in your community. Just check around. Please don't forget to take good care of you. Remember that you are important and you matter. And of course, thanks for looking out for all those kids out there, from babies to tweens to teens. Looking forward to tossing some more information your way next week. Thank you so much for joining me today. Have a super weekend, and y'all be safe out there.
Don't forget to be safe. I appreciate it.